What's up, Robert? Are you sick of nerds like me asking you Freddy questions yet?
No, I'm not. The only problem I run into is occasionally I get journalists that have gone to the same source on the internet for their questions, and I can kind of tell where they've done their research. That's fine, but I can't really be fresh because of the way the question's worded or because of the source material. I'm sort of trapped into repeating myself. I like to keep it fresh, but I can't lie to you guys. I don't want to tell you lies.
Oh, you're.
I have to kind of freshen it up sometimes. And
I hear
so
that.
if you hear me digress, the reason I digress is because you've motivated me to think of something that maybe I haven't said before.
Well, considering that interview is about the seven film re-release of the first seven movies, I wanted to know, aside from the very first one, which of your performances as Freddy are you personally the most proud of?
I like my performance in part four, the Rennie Harlan film. Uh, Rennie left me alone, and he understood that Freddie only exists in this dream landscape, this sort of a landscape of the mind, of the dream, of the nightmare. And so he's not real. He's been conjured by the subconscious of whoever is having the nightmare. And so it can be a little stylized, you know. I mean, if we were really going to get serious about this, Freddie could be a little bit different for every single person that's having a nightmare. He could
Right.
be taller or shorter. He could be more burned. He could be less burned. He could be heavy. He could be skinnier. It could change. The hat could change a little bit. The claw could be a little different. Even though it's just one Freddy that's in the nightmare, he might manifest a little differently according to the imagination of that potential victim.
Now, through the arc of these seven films, Freddy's personality shifts a bit. How much of that was your influence versus what was in the scripts? Because you clearly have from what you were just saying, you have great ideas about how Freddy is conjured.
Freddy was always cracking wise. He was always a cruel clown.
Hmm.
And he was always my image that I used. A lot of actors use animal imagery. Was like a cat toying with a mouse before he kills it, and enjoying that. But Wes had included a lot of jokes in the original one. We kind of, I mean, perhaps we, I don't know, pushed the envelope too much by the time we got to part six, Freddy's Dead. But we were just embracing what the fans loved, and the fans loved Freddy's personality. They loved his cruelty, they loved his political incorrectness, and they loved his jokes. So we just exploited that.
When we last talked, you were pretty keen on the idea of voicing Freddy for an adult animated movie. Has there been any sort of update on ideas for a future Freddy
I
project
don't
pitched to
know.
you?
Again, when you do animation, it takes a long time. But I would love to be asked, to do the voice. If someone did a feature length or a series or something based on the Nightmare on Elm Street stories, I think that would be fun. And I've seen so many phenomenal illustrations and storyboards in comic books, violent, sexy, and otherwise, over the years. There's so many options for style for an animated Freddy. I know they would come up with something great. I'd certainly jump on board for that. I just got done doing the evil cricket, the bad cricket in Pinocchio unstrung. So I love doing voice work. It's just so much fun.
Freddy's Revenge is it's being massively reevaluated, and I wanted to know how does it feel watching the 4K restoration, knowing the film now has this cult, almost revered status.
I couldn't be happier. I mean, you know, I I made the film. It was, I was hired at the last minute because Wes had dropped out, and I thought I could make a better movie than the original Elm Street. I mean, that was my attitude. Whether I did or not, that's not up to me. But that's how I went into it. And then the movie came out, it made a lot of money, and the phone started ringing, and I went on and made a bunch of more movies, and I really didn't think much about Elm Street. I mean, Elm Street, really launched me. And I also have to say it, once a year, a letter arrives with a check in it from Warner Brothers. So it's been very good to me. But, I didn't really, I didn't really think that much about it. And then about 10 years ago, actually almost exactly 10 years ago, there was a reunion at a convention, and I hadn't seen any of the people, and found out from Mark Patton, what had been going on, how the film was being reevaluated. It was always considered sort of the ugly stepsister of all, because it didn't follow the format. And people started interviewing me. And I remember there were a couple of women who had a Freddy website, and they said, and when they published it, they got some flack, and they said, you really have to look at this on its own. If you try to say, why doesn't it fit in with all the others, you're going to be dissatisfied. But if you just look at it on its own as a movie about Freddy Krueger and all this stuff, and that made me, because that was really how I made it. There were no rules, there was no template that I had to follow. They just said, make him scary. That was the only thing.
Was there ever any discussion for you to take on the third one, or was that something that you just weren't interested in at the time?
I'm not sure that they discussed it at all, but I wouldn't have been interested if they had. I don't think it ever came up. I was looking for something that was going to take me in another direction, and it took me about a year and a half for the Hidden to come my way.
Now some fans think I was gonna say some fans think that Freddy is actually scarier in your film than any of the others. He's very, he's much more monstrous. He's a little less jokey than he would, go on to become. Was that a deliberate tonal choice for you?
That was the only instruction I got from New Line, was they didn't like his makeup from the original. So I hired Kevin Yeager, because he was a sculptor. I mean, he'd gone to art school. And they said, keep him dark. And the cameraman, the director of photography, Jacques Hayden, was the guy who shot the first one. He was very, very good. And so, we worked very hard to keep him looking scary, to keep him dark and shiny and all the rest of that. And that was the only thing. But I'm always pleased when people tell me it's scary, because our fear was it wasn't going to be that scary.
Were there any creative risks that you took in your film that you now feel, were ahead of their time?
Not really. I was just trying to shoot the script. Like, I mean, just to make the movie was a risk, to tell you the truth. I mean, there were a lot of things that had to be done that had to sort of come off just right. And I'd been working as an editor in New York, and I was a really good editor. So I kind of thought like an editor, so I could kind of see all these pieces and how the pieces of the jigsaw would fit together. So when you're shooting, you're just shooting these little pieces, and then hopefully they work. And so it was great when we got into the editing room, and they actually did. So it was a real feeling of accomplishment.
I got
Scene is a great example.
Excluding yours, what's your favorite film in the franchise?
Wes's New Nightmare.
Yeah, very unique.
I also thought 3 was really good. I wasn't a big fan of 4. I thought 4 was okay. I thought 5 was cold, kind of really left me cold, and 6 I thought was a bit of a mishmash.
You've been with New Line as a producer before directing, and I wanted to know, how did that insider experience shape the way you approached Freddy's Dead?
There is no way I could have done Freddy's Dead without having produced part 3 and part 4, because that's where I learned everything I know about filmmaking. I learned from how complicated the Nightmare films were. And it set me so that I understood how to do stop motion, which who gets to do that? And people coming in and out of mirrors, which we didn't know how to do. And then creating new technology for the 3D, all on with no money. So having had to do that through the franchise, I just learned how to be creative and never say no to whatever the challenges are. And that's worked through my whole career.
So what you're telling me is that in the early 90s, you were very stressed out.
Oh my God. Part 3 near did us in. There was so much to it. And I mean, I think it's a real remarkable feat that we made that film for under $4.5 million. Even then, I mean,
Yeah.
what we accomplished, incredible. And
Now,
and therefore the next film's having to accomplish just as much.
right.
And hats off to the other directors as well.
I want to say, so by 1991, Freddie had really become a cultural icon and part of the zeitgeist. How did that larger than life presence really affect your direction of Freddy's Dead?
It didn't really. I mean, my eye on the ball was I've got to do the best possible job I can figure out how to do. And what I do understand is is the effects. What I also understand is that we have this 3D that's going to suck tons of time out of our world, and we have to create a new technology. But my focus was, well, we know the franchise works, we know how the kills work, so let's make sure I just do that as well as I possibly can.
Now, Freddy's Dead, like you mentioned, you kind of invented new technology for it. It had a lot of inventive dream sequences. Which one are you most excited for audiences to sort of rediscover, in 4K on this release?
I love the Carlo sequence. I think it looks beautiful. I think it's scary. I think it has a great growth of tension. But the 3D is incredible. And knowing that most people have never seen the film in the last 10 minutes in 3D, and knowing that we had to change the color so that it's a much more muted color in order to make the 3D work in those days. And we had to change the pacing of the editing in order to make the 3D work. So it always has felt odd when you watch it in 2D. And so to watch it again, and the new technology, the ability to use the left and right eye in the digital world, the 3D is incredible. It's better than I could ever imagine it ever looking. And so I came out of the color timing session just flying with joy, saying, "Can I tell people how great this is?" So I can't wait for people to see how it was supposed to be, and how it feels totally different seeing it in 3D, and what a different effectsy sequence it is.
Now, I wanted to ask, so looking back, do you feel like the franchise really ended with your film, or did you always expect Freddy to sort of return in some form or fashion?
We never really discussed. All we discussed was how do we up the box office again, and how do we satisfy the audience. We didn't discuss, oh, this will definitely be the end. I wasn't really, as opposed to, I mean, there's a publicity thing for me back then saying, of course it's the end. Well, of course I would say that. I was told to say that.
Yeah.
I didn't know. I wasn't actually, those were not my decisions. But I have to say that bringing it back with New Nightmare with Wes Craven in a meta fashion was brilliant. Was the non-cheesy way to bring it back without bringing it back.